For most, a palace is a symbol of unimaginable luxury, a fantasy of silk, gold, and absolute power. But for the 3,000 women who walked these halls, the Forbidden City was not a home. It was the most beautiful, intricate, and inescapable prison ever built. Their lives were governed by a single crushing purpose, and it wasn't to love the emperor or to share his life. It was to be a vessel, a living, breathing vessel for his bloodline. This wasn't a life of romance. It was a cold, biological duty enforced by the most powerful and impersonal machine in the ancient world, the Imperial Court. Behind the jewel-encrusted hairpins and the priceless silk robes lay a truth so dark it was never spoken aloud. Within these walls, these thousands of women were not people. They were property. They were living pawns in a savage, silent game of dynastic power, where their value was not in their heart, wit, or mind. It was measured in a single brutal metric: their womb. From the moment a girl was chosen, from the instant she passed through the gates, her old life was over. Her name was erased. Her family became a distant memory she was forbidden to maintain, and her entire identity was stripped away and replaced with a title, a rank, a number in a vast, complex hierarchy of women, all waiting for a single man. Her body, from that moment on, no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the dragon throne. In this golden prison, love was a dangerous fantasy. Desire was a punishable crime. Affection was a weakness that could and would be exploited by her rivals. There was only one goal: survival. And, if she was one of the impossibly lucky few, advancement. The Emperor was the sun, the center of this universe, but he was not the true power. He was a concept. The true power in the Forbidden City was the system itself. A rigid, ancient, and unforgiving set of rules, traditions, and hierarchies managed by a cold, calculating bureaucracy of eunuchs. These men, who had sacrificed their own manhood to serve the throne, were the jailers. They were the administrators of this vast human collection. They recorded everything. They watched every glance. They managed the schedules. They decided who was pure, who was ready, and who would be presented. And this system created the most horrifying monster of all. It wasn't the emperor. It wasn't the guards or the eunuchs. It was what the women were forced to become to one another. When 3,000 people are locked in a cage, all competing for the same singular prize, a moment of the emperor's attention, the chance to bear his son, what happens to their humanity? It dissolves. It gives way to a constant, silent, and vicious psychological war. A war fought not with armies, but with whispers, with rumors, with a poisoned cup of tea, with a friendly push down a flight of stairs. This is the true, horrifying duty of the concubine. It wasn't just to serve the emperor. It was to survive the thousands of other women who would do anything to take her place. The duty itself was a masterpiece of cold, impersonal logistics. A woman's chance was not left to fate or the emperor's whim. It was a calculated decision made by the senior eunuchs and the Imperial Dowager. They were the true masters of the harem. They meticulously catalogued every woman, her family lineage, her health, her temperament, and, most importantly, her menstrual cycle. They were human stock breeders, managing the herd for the sole purpose of producing a perfect heir. When a woman was chosen, she was not invited, she was summoned. Her selection would begin. She would be bathed by attendants, her entire body scrubbed and perfumed. She would be examined by eunuchs to ensure she was pure and free of any hidden weapons. Then, in the ultimate act of objectification, she would be stripped naked and wrapped in a heavy quilt or carpet. She was not permitted to walk to the emperor's bedchamber. She was a package, delivered and carried on the shoulders of a eunuch, utterly helpless, and laid at the foot of the emperor's bed. He would signal, and the eunuch would unroll the carpet, revealing her. She was not a partner, she was an offering. But in the cold, grey light of morning, the true terror began. This was not a night of passion. It was an audit. An attending eunuch would be waiting just outside the chamber door. He would approach the woman as she left and ask a single, chilling question. Not, "Are you well?" but a variation of, "Did the dragon favour you?" If she claimed she was with child, her life would change in an instant. She would be noted in a silver-brushed ledger and isolated for protection. But this protection was just another, smaller, more heavily guarded cage. She was no longer just a woman. She was an imperial incubator. And she was now a living, breathing target for every other woman in that palace. If she said no, that the emperor had not favoured her, the eunuch would note that too. Or he might offer her a tea, a bitter brew designed to cleanse her, ensuring no unauthorized seed could take root. After that, she was simply returned. Sent back to her small, cold room in the vast city of women to wait, and to pray that her name might be chosen again before she was forgotten forever. This is where the whispers took on the sharpness of a blade. The moment a woman was entered into that silver ledger as potentially fruitful, the silent war turned hot. Did a rival accidentally bump into her, just a little too hard, in a stone courtyard? Did a friendly servant, one secretly loyal to a different concubine, offer her a calming tea, one that held the faint, bitter scent of almonds? Was the floor of her personal bathhouse mysteriously slicked with oil, turning a simple step into a fatal one? It was a war of 1,000 accidents, a war of misfortune and terrible luck. Every smile from another concubine was a mask. Every gift of food was a potential threat. Every new servant was a potential spy. Or worse, an assassin, sent by a rival who knew that stopping a pregnancy was far, far easier than competing with a living son. This was the terrifying paradox of the concubine's life. To fail the duty meant a life of invisible irrelevance. To succeed meant inviting death to your door. For the thousands of women inside the Forbidden City, there were only two paths forward, and both were a form of living death. The first, and most common, was the path of the forgotten. A woman would be chosen in her youth, perhaps in her mid-teens, for her beauty and her family connections. She might be summoned once, a dozen times, or in a palace so crowded, perhaps never at all. As months turned into years, and years into a decade, her value in the cold arithmetic of the court began to plummet. She was no longer a new face. She was no longer in the first bloom of youth. The endless stream of new, younger concubines, chosen at the next selection, pushed her further and further down the eunuch's ledger. She became a grey lady, a living ghost. Every day, she would wake in the same small gilded room, perform the same rituals, and put on the same intricate makeup. But the summons never came. She was an echo in an empty hall, trapped in a timeless, pointless loop. She was still a prisoner. She could not leave. She could not marry. She could not see her family. Her entire life became a long, slow funeral for her own youth, a funeral that no one else attended. The other women, her rivals, no longer saw her as a threat. They barely saw her at all. She was simply part of the architecture, another silent, breathing ornament in the vast collection. Many of these women were consumed by an isolation so profound it bordered on madness, pacing their small courtyards, talking to themselves, or clinging to a small pet as the only source of warmth in a world made of stone and rules. This was the quiet, hollow tragedy of failure. But for the woman who did succeed, the one who navigated the accidents and survived the poisoned gifts, the woman who successfully bore the emperor a child, a far more twisted fate awaited. She had won the game. She had performed the duty. She was elevated. She received a new, higher title. She was given finer silks, better food, and her own servants. She was, for the first time, a person of consequence. And then, the system performed its most terrifying and precise surgical procedure. Her child was taken away. Her duty was never to be a mother. It was to produce an heir. The imperial system, in its cold, brutal logic, recognized maternal love as the single greatest threat to its power. A mother's loyalty is to her child, not to the state. A mother with a son might begin to plot. She might form a faction. She might see the emperor not as her master, but as an obstacle to her son's advancement. And so, the bond had to be severed, immediately and completely. The newborn prince or princess was handed over to designated court nurses, or, in an act of supreme political calculation, the child would be given to a higher-ranking woman to raise as her own. The official empress, if she was childless, would often adopt the son of a lower-ranking concubine, instantly making that child the legitimate heir and claiming all the political power that came with it. The biological mother, the woman who had survived the horrors of the harem and endured childbirth, was forced to watch from a distance as her own child called another woman mother. This was the state's ultimate act of emotional theft. She was granted the status of mother, but denied the experience of motherhood. She could see her child only at designated times, and only with the official mother present. She had to bow. She had to refer to her own son as His Highness. She was a vessel, used and then discarded. Her child was now a dynastic asset, a piece on the great board. And she was just the woman who had put him there. This system of methodical cruelty, this emotional meat grinder, was designed to produce one thing: obedience. It was built to shatter the will, to crush the spirit, and to ensure that no single woman could ever challenge the power of the throne. For 99.9% of the women who entered the Forbidden City, the system worked. It consumed them, turning them into grey ladies or the weeping, discarded mothers of another woman's son. But every so often, the system failed. It didn't just break a woman, it forged her. It took her humanity, her fear, her love, and her compassion, and burned it all away in a crucible of trauma, leaving behind something as hard and as brilliant as a diamond. It created a master, a woman who survived the poison, a woman who endured the theft of her child, a woman who watched her rivals rise and fall, and who learned with cold precision from every single mistake. She stopped thinking about survival. She started thinking about power. This was the final and most dangerous evolution of the concubine. She was no longer a pawn in the game. She became the player. Her weapons were no longer the petty tools of the harem, the rumors, and the accidents. They became far more potent. She forged alliances with the eunuchs, turning her jailers into her personal spies. She cultivated relationships with court officials, using her family connections, the very connections she was supposed to forget, to build a network of influence outside the palace walls. And most importantly, she had a son. She had been forbidden from raising him, but she had never stopped watching him. She ensured her allies were his tutors. She ensured her loyal eunuchs were his attendants. She built a wall of influence around the boy, shaping him from a distance, turning him not into a son, but into her ultimate weapon. Her entire life became a single, cold calculation, waiting for the emperor to die. And when he did, her son would ascend the dragon throne. And she would ascend with him. She would be given the title that dwarfed all others, Empress Dowager, the mother of the nation. In this new role, she was untouchable. She was the matriarch, the elder, the most revered person in the empire. And from behind a silk screen, whispering into the ear of her son, the new, young emperor, she would rule. This was the system's ultimate, ironic failure. The woman who was brought in as a vessel had just seized control of the entire machine. And from this position of absolute power, she was often more ruthless, more cold, and more terrifying than any man who had ever sat on the throne. Figures like Empress Lu of Han, who, after her husband's death, systematically hunted down and horrifically mutilated his favorite concubine, the woman who had been her rival. She had the woman's limbs cut off, her eyes gouged out, and her ears deafened before throwing her into a latrine and calling her the human swine. Or Empress Dowager Cixi, who ruled China for decades from behind the curtain, manipulating emperors, poisoning rivals, and controlling the fate of hundreds of millions, all from within the very walls that had once been her prison. These women had learned the brutal lessons of the harem all too well, that compassion is weakness, that trust is a fool's game, that power is the only thing that is real. They had beaten the system, but only by becoming it. They had gained the world, but in the process had become the most profound and terrifying tragedy the Forbidden City had ever produced. The perfect, hollow, and unshakable monster. The imperial harem system was a paradox, a perfect, self-consuming machine. It was designed with one single-minded purpose: to protect the purity of the emperor's bloodline and ensure the eternal stability of the dynasty. But this obsession with perfection and purity became its most potent poison. By attempting to control every aspect of human life, by reducing women to vessels and children to assets, the system did not eliminate human nature. It simply warped it. It channeled all the normal human emotions, love, ambition, fear, and desire, into a dark, concentrated, and toxic underground river. This river of paranoia, backstabbing, and silent, vicious rivalry didn't just stay confined to the women's quarters. It seeped out and flooded the entire Forbidden City. The eunuchs, who were meant to be neutral administrators, became corrupt kingmakers, selling their influence to the highest bidding concubine. The imperial ministers, who were meant to govern the empire, were forced to choose sides in the harem's invisible wars, forming factions loyal not to the emperor, but to his mother or his favorite wife. The entire government, the most sophisticated bureaucracy on earth, was slowly and systematically paralyzed by the infighting of the inner court. The system, designed to produce one perfect, untouchable heir, instead produced generations of paranoid princes, raised in a world where their own mother was a stranger and their brothers were mortal threats. These men ascended the throne knowing nothing of the real world, of famine or taxes or invasion. They knew only the golden cage and the smiling vipers within it, and so the dynasty rotted from the inside out. It became a hollow, beautiful shell. When real-world crises finally came, when peasant rebellions rose up, or foreign armies knocked on the gates, The Forbidden City was incapable of responding. It was too busy with its own civil war, too consumed by its own ancient toxic rules. The very machine built to ensure immortality was the thing that guaranteed its death. Today, the Forbidden City still stands. It is one of the most visited places on Earth, a breathtaking monument to beauty and power, but it is also a tomb. It is a monument to the thousands of forgotten grey ladies who withered away in its gilded courtyards, their names and faces erased by time. It is a monument to the mothers who were never allowed to hold their children, forced to watch their own lives from a terrible, silent distance. And it is a monument to the chilling, inhuman logic of absolute power. The true duty of the concubine was not, in the end, to serve the emperor. It was to be a human sacrifice, a sacrifice of identity, love, and the soul itself, all laid upon the cold, stone altar of the dynasty. It leaves us with a final, haunting question. When a system demands perfection, what is the cost of the humanity it must first destroy?